Eli Navarro is a poor single dad who runs a struggling shoe repair shop. His daughter, Sofia, dreams of dance school, but they can barely pay rent. One afternoon, a panicked woman rushes in with broken designer heels and 20 minutes to make an important meeting. This is Juliette LaRue, a billionaire fashion heiress who's used to getting everything she wants. But in Eli's humble shop, she finds something money can't buy. Eli fixes her heel perfectly and refuses payment, telling her some things are worth more when they're put back together right. His kindness touches something deep inside Jet that she'd forgotten existed. Days later, she returns with a private jet and an incredible offer that could change everything for Eli and Sofia. But her world of wealth and his world of honest work are about to collide in ways neither expected. What happens when two people from completely different worlds discover they might be exactly what each other needs? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning sun filtered through the dusty window of Navarro's shoe repair, casting golden rectangles across worn wooden floors that had witnessed 40 years of honest labor. Eli Navarro stood at his workbench, examining a pair of children's sneakers with the same reverence a museum curator might show an ancient artifact. The left sole had separated completely, flopping like a hungry mouth, while the right showed the telltale wear pattern of a child who favored one foot over the other. "Pigeon-toed," he murmured to himself, a gentle smile creasing the corners of his eyes. "Just needs guidance, like we all do." The shop occupied the ground floor of a narrow brick building that had stood on Maple Street since 1952, when Eli's father, Roberto, had first hung the hand-painted sign that still swayed gently in the morning breeze. 3 generations of Navarros had breathed life into worn leather within these walls, treating each repair not as mere transaction, but as an act of restoration that went deeper than sole and stitching. Every surface in the shop told a story. The workbench, scarred by decades of careful craftsmanship, bore the marks of Roberto's learning years, small knife slips that had become part of the wood's character. The pegboard, where tools hung in perfect order, displayed an array of implements that would puzzle most people. Curved awls, edge burnishers, lasting pliers, and hammers of various weights, each with a specific purpose in the delicate dance of restoration. Behind the counter, shelves lined with shoe-polish tins created a rainbow of browns and blacks, burgundies and tans. The cash register, a 1970s model that still required manual calculation, sat beside a ceramic cup, holding pencils worn down to nubs and a small notepad where Eli recorded each customer's preferences. Mrs. Patterson liked her heels built up a 1/4 inch. Mr. Kim's Oxfords needed extra arch support. Sarah Chen's school shoes required reinforced toes because she was tough on footwear. These details mattered to Eli. In a world increasingly obsessed with disposability, he held firm to the belief that everything deserved a second chance, properly executed. The bell above the door chimed as Sofia bounded down the narrow stairs connecting the shop to their modest apartment above. At 16, she possessed her late mother's natural grace and her father's expressive dark eyes, but there was an energy about her that seemed barely contained by the small space they called home. Her dance bag hung across her shoulder, stuffed, with worn ballet slippers that had been resoled twice, and reinforced with medical tape where the canvas had begun to fray. "Morning, Papa," she said, planting a quick kiss on his cheek before examining the sneakers in his hands. "Another athlete in training?" "Looks like it," Eli replied, holding up the shoes so she could see the wear pattern. "Strong push-off from the left foot favors the right for balance. Soccer player, I'd guess." Sofia nodded appreciatively. Her father had taught her to read shoes the way others read books, understanding that every scuff and crease told the story of someone's journey. It was a skill that had made her surprisingly good at understanding people, though she rarely mentioned this connection to her friends at school. The Henderson's boy, she said with certainty. He's in my chemistry class. Talks about making varsity. Next year, then we'll make sure these last until he does. Sofia moved to the small mirror mounted beside the stairs, adjusting her hair with practiced efficiency. Her movements held the controlled precision of a trained dancer, even in these simple gestures. Every morning, she transformed from shop owner's daughter to aspiring artist, though the lines between these identities grew more blurred each day. "You practicing after school today?" Eli asked, though he already knew the answer. Sofia had been practicing every day for the past 3 months, preparing for auditions she couldn't afford to attend. Mrs. Rodriguez said I could use the community center until 5, Sofia replied, her voice carrying that particular mix of hope and resignation that had become familiar in their household. "She's been teaching me the variations from Giselle." Eli's hands stilled on the sneakers. Maria Rodriguez had been a principal dancer with the City Ballet before retiring to teach at the community center. That she was working with Sofia personally spoke to his daughter's talent, but it also highlighted everything he couldn't provide. Real training cost money they didn't have. Proper shoes cost money they didn't have. Audition fees, competition entries, summer intensives, all of it required. Resources that seemed as distant as the moon. "That's wonderful, Misha," he said and meant it. Pride and worry warred in his chest, the eternal conflict of a parent who wants to encourage dreams while protecting against inevitable disappointment. Sofia caught something in his tone and turned from the mirror. "It's okay, Papa. I know things." "Are tight. Things are always tight," Eli replied with forced lightness. "Doesn't mean they won't get better." But even as he spoke the words, he could feel the weight of the bills stacked on the small desk in the corner. 3 months behind on rent, 2 notices from the electric company, the refrigerator upstairs making sounds that suggested its own need for expensive repair. The neighborhood around them changed daily, with gleaming new businesses opening in spaces that had housed family-owned shops for decades. Navarro's shoe repair felt increasingly like a relic from another era, appreciated by long-time customers, but invisible to the young professionals who moved through the area with purpose and urgency. The bell chimed again, and Mrs. Chen from the corner market entered carrying a pair of sensible black flats. At 73, she had been patronizing the shop since Roberto's time, and her loyalty had sustained them through more difficult periods than Eli cared to count. "Good morning, Eli, Sofia," she said in accented English that had softened, but never fully lost its Beijing origins. "These shoes, they are good shoes, but the sole is wearing thin on the side." Eli accepted the flats with the gentle care he showed every customer's footwear, examining them with professional attention. The shoes were indeed good quality, constructed in an era when manufacturers expected their products to last decades, rather than seasons. The leather uppers remained supple and strong, but the soles showed the distinctive wear pattern of someone who slightly favored her left side, probably due to an old injury or arthritis. "I can build these up and add a comfort pad," he told her. "Have them ready by Thursday." Mrs. Chen nodded approvingly. "You do good work like your father. Maria, she would be proud." The mention of his late wife still caused a small tightening in Eli's chest, even 3 years after her passing. Maria had understood his craft in ways that went beyond words, often sitting in the shop during quiet afternoons, reading or helping Sofia with homework while he worked. She had possessed an artist's eye that could see beauty in worn leather and careful stitching, and her loss had left a silence in the shop that no amount of radio music could quite fill. "Thank you, Mrs. Chen," he said simply. After she left, Sofia approached the workbench where her father had returned to examining the children's sneakers. She watched his hands move over the shoes with practiced precision, fingers reading the leather like braille. "Papa," she said carefully, "there's something I need to tell you." Eli looked up, recognizing the tone that typically preceded either very good news or very bad news, with little middle ground between them. "The ballet company is holding auditions next month," Sofia continued, For their summer intensive program, Mrs. Rodriguez thinks I have a real chance. Eli set down the sneakers, giving his daughter his full attention. That's wonderful, Mija. You've been working so hard. The audition fee is $200, Sofia said quickly, as if speed might somehow reduce the impact of the number. And if I get in, the program costs $3,000. The figures hung in the air between them, like a challenge to the basic mathematics of their existence. $200 represented a month of groceries. $3,000 was more than they typically made in a good quarter. Eli felt the familiar weight of parental inadequacy, the crushing awareness that his daughter's dreams bumped against the immovable reality of their circumstances. "We'll figure something out," he said, though he had no idea how. Sofia's eyes brightened, with hope and gratitude that made Eli's chest ache. She kissed his cheek again and headed toward the door, dance bag bouncing against her hip. "I love you, Papa. See you tonight." After she left, Eli stood alone in his shop, surrounded by the tools and techniques passed down through generations, feeling the weight of responsibility that came with being the end of the line. If he couldn't find a way to support Sofia's dreams, what had all this preservation of craft and tradition been for? He picked up the children's sneakers again, studying the separated soul with renewed focus. Like everything else in his world, they just needed the right attention, the proper care, and enough time to heal. The question was whether time was something they could afford. Outside, Maple Street hummed with its daily rhythm of change and continuity, old and new existing in uneasy partnership. Inside Navarro's shoe repair, Eli began the patient work of restoration, one stitch at a time, hoping that somewhere in the careful process of making broken things whole again, he might find an answer to his family's growing needs. The morning. Light shifted across his workbench as he worked, illuminating the worn ballet slippers Sofia had left behind on the counter. Canvas soft from use, elastic stretched from countless hours of practice, soles thin from contact with unforgiving flaws. They were beautiful in their deterioration, testament to dedication and dreams that refused to be contained by circumstances. Eli touched them gently, these artifacts of his daughter's passion, and made a silent promise to find a way forward, even if he couldn't yet see what that path might look like. The rain arrived without warning on a Tuesday afternoon, transforming Maple Street from a sun-drenched corridor of commerce into a glistening river of reflected neon and hurried footsteps. Eli watched from behind his workbench as pedestrians ducked under awnings and into doorways, their careful morning routines abandoned in favor of practical urgency. He had been working on Mrs. Patterson's pumps, rebuilding the worn heel with layers of leather and patience, when the storm clouds opened with the sudden intensity that marked autumn in the city. The shop felt especially cozy during weather like this, its warm yellow lighting and the steady tick of the wall clock creating a sanctuary from the chaos outside. The bell above his door chimed with unusual force, and Eli looked up to see a woman, unlike any customer who had ever entered his shop. She stood in the doorway like a figure from another world, tall, elegant, wearing a cream-colored wool coat that probably cost more than he made in 6 months. Her dark hair was pulled back in a style that spoke of professional styling, and her makeup remained remarkably intact despite the downpour outside, but it was her shoes that caught his professional attention immediately. Designer heels, unmistakably expensive, with a construction quality that reminded him of the European craftsmanship his father had once shown him in old magazines. Unfortunately, the left heel had snapped completely, leaving her balanced precariously on one good shoe, while the broken one dangled from her foot like a wounded bird. "Please," she said, her voice carrying the kind of authoritative tone that suggested she was accustomed to having problems solved quickly and efficiently. "I know this is probably impossible, but I have a meeting in 20 minutes, and I can't exactly hobble into a boardroom." Eli set down his tools and stood, his natural inclination toward helpfulness overriding any intimidation he might have felt in the presence of obvious wealth. "Let me take a look." She stepped carefully into the shop, using the doorframe for balance as she slipped off the damaged shoe. Up close, Eli could see the quality of the construction. Hand-stitched leather, precision engineering in the heel mechanism, details that spoke to craftsmanship he rarely encountered in his daily work. "Beautiful shoes," he said, accepting the wounded heel with the reverence it deserved. "Italian?" "French," she replied, seeming surprised that he would recognize quality construction. "Louboutin. I know it's probably hopeless, but—" "Nothing's hopeless," Eli interrupted gently, already examining the breakpoint where the heel had separated from the sole. "Just needs the right approach." He moved to his workbench with practiced efficiency, pulling out tools and materials while his mind calculated the repair process. The break was clean, which was good. The internal structure remained intact, which was better. With the right adhesive and a temporary support pin, he could create a repair that would last through whatever meeting demanded her presence. "I'm Juliette," she said, watching him work with an intensity that suggested she wasn't accustomed to observing manual labor up close. "But most people call me Jet." "Eli Navarro," he replied, without looking up from the heel. "And I can have this stable in 15 minutes, strong in 24 hours. Jet seemed taken aback by his confidence. "You can really fix it? Permanently?" "Well, permanently might be optimistic," Eli said with a slight smile, applying adhesive with surgical precision. "But it'll hold for whatever you need to do today, and if you bring it back tomorrow, I can reinforce it properly." As he worked, Jet found herself studying the shop with growing fascination. She had never been in a place like this, where function mattered more than form, where tools showed honest wear from decades of use, where the smell of leather and polish created an atmosphere of purposeful craft. Everything in her world was designed, coordinated, optimized for image and efficiency. This felt real in a way she had almost forgotten existed. "How long have you been doing this?" she asked. "All my life," Eli replied, positioning a small clamp to hold the repair in place. "Learned from my father, who learned from his father, 3 generations of fixing what others might throw away." "That's remarkable," Jet said, and meant it. In her industry, 3 seasons was considered a long-term commitment. The idea of generational knowledge, of skills passed down through decades of practice, struck her as both admirable and impossibly foreign. Eli glanced up at her, noting something in her voice that suggested genuine interest rather than polite conversation. "What kind of meeting requires perfect shoes on a rainy Tuesday?" "Board meeting," Jet said, then added with a rueful laugh, "I'm trying to convince a room full of men that I know what I'm doing, and unfortunately they judge competence by appearance first." "That must be exhausting," Eli observed, returning, his attention to the heel. "Always having to prove yourself." The simplicity of his statement, delivered without judgment or advice, struck Jet with unexpected force. When had anyone last acknowledged that her professional life might be tiring rather than exciting? When had someone understood that success could feel like an endless audition? "It is," she admitted. "Sometimes I wonder what it would be like to do work that speaks for itself." Eli looked around his shop, at the shelves of shoes waiting for repair, at the tools that had served 3 generations of craftsmen. "Every job speaks," he said quietly. "Question is whether people are listening." He removed the clamp and tested the repair with gentle pressure. The heel held firm, the breakpoint invisible, unless you knew exactly where to look. He handed the shoe back to Jet, with the same care he might show a piece of art. "There you go. That should get you through your meeting and whatever comes after." Jet slipped the shoe back on and tested her weight distribution. The repair felt solid, natural, as if the break had never happened. She reached into her purse, pulling out a wallet that probably contained more cash than Eli typically saw in a week. "What do I owe you?" Eli shook his head, already beginning to clean his tools. "Nothing, it was a quick fix." But your time, your skill, some things are worth more when they're put back together right, Eli said, his voice carrying the weight of personal philosophy. Payment isn't always about money. Jet stared at him. This man, who had just solved her immediate crisis with skill and kindness, asking nothing in return. In her world, every favor came with expectations. Every service carried a price tag. Every kindness concealed calculation. The simplicity of his gesture, help offered freely because help was needed, felt revolutionary. I don't know how to thank you, she said. Just be careful in the rain, Eli replied with a smile. And maybe consider more practical shoes for days like this. Jet laughed, a genuine sound that seemed to surprise her as much as it pleased him. I'll keep that in mind. She moved toward the door, then paused, looking back at this humble shop that had provided what her wealth couldn't buy. Simple, human. Kindness, without agenda. I hope I see you again, Eli Navarro. You know where to find me, he said. Same place every day, fixing what others might throw away. After she left, Eli stood for a moment in the sudden quiet of his shop, aware that something had shifted in ways he couldn't quite define. The encounter had lasted less than 30 minutes, but it lingered in his mind like the echo of an unexpected song. He returned to Mrs. Patterson's pumps, but found his attention drifting to the rain-spotted business card lying on his workbench. Cream-colored, stock with elegant lettering that read Juliette LaRue, CEO LaRue Fashion Group. She had pulled it from her purse during the conversation, then apparently forgotten it in her rush to make the meeting. Eli picked up the card, noting the weight of the paper, the embossed logo, the address that placed her company in the most expensive part of downtown. LaRue Fashion Group. He had heard the name, seen it in the fashion magazines Sofia sometimes flipped through at the grocery store. This woman who had stood in his shop, grateful for a simple repair, ran an empire built on the very disposability he spent his days fighting against. The irony wasn't lost on him, but neither was the memory of her genuine surprise at his refusal of payment, or the way she had looked around his shop as if seeing something valuable that she had been missing. Some people, he reflected, were just as broken as the shoes they wore, and sometimes they didn't even know it until someone showed them what wholeness might look like. He slipped the business card into his apron pocket, not sure why he felt compelled to keep it, and returned to his work. Outside, the rain continued to fall, washing the city clean for whatever tomorrow might bring. 3 days passed before Eli found himself thinking about anything other than Juliette LaRue's unexpected visit. The encounter had left him with an odd sense of anticipation, though he couldn't quite explain what he was anticipating. He went through his daily routines, repairing Mrs. Kim's Oxfords, resoling the Henderson boys' soccer cleats, polishing Mr. Rodriguez's dress shoes, but part of his attention remained focused on the bell above his door, wondering if it might chime again with the same urgent intensity. Sofia noticed his distraction during their Thursday evening dinner of rice and beans, a meal that had become depressingly frequent as their grocery budget tightened around them like a slowly closing fist. You've been different since Tuesday, she observed, twirling her fork in the modest portion she had served herself. More thoughtful than usual. Just thinking about the business, Eli replied, which wasn't entirely untrue. He had been thinking about business, specifically about how precarious their situation had become and how few options remained available to them. The woman with the expensive shoes. Eli looked up sharply. How did you... Papa, I live upstairs. I hear everything that happens in the shop. Sofia smiled with the knowing expression of a teenager who understood more about adult concerns than her father sometimes realized. Besides, you kept her business card. She was right, of course. The cream-colored card remained in his apron pocket, pulled out and examined several times each day for reasons he couldn't articulate. Juliette LaRue, CEO, LaRue Fashion Group. The weight of the paper spoke to resources beyond his comprehension, but he remembered most clearly the genuine surprise in her voice when he had refused payment. It was just an interesting conversation. He said carefully, Sofia set down her fork and gave him the direct look she had inherited from her mother, the expression that suggested she could see through any attempt at evasion. "Papa, I looked her up online. Do you know who that woman is?" Eli felt a familiar tightness in his chest. In his world, researching customers online seemed like a violation of the basic trust that governed his business relationships. People brought him their shoes. He fixed them with skill and integrity. What they did beyond his shop was their own concern. "She's the CEO of one of the biggest fashion companies in the country," Sofia continued, her voice building with excitement. "Her family's been in fashion for like 4 generations. She's worth hundreds of millions of dollars, Papa, maybe billions." The numbers felt abstract to Eli, like discussing the distance to distant stars. What did billions mean to someone who counted success in terms of satisfied customers and repairs that lasted for years? But he could see the hope building in his daughter's eyes, and that worried him more than any amount of money could have excited him. "That doesn't change anything, Mija," he said gently. "Rich people need their shoes fixed just like everyone else." "But Papa, don't you see, this could be an opportunity. Maybe she needs someone with your skills, your knowledge about craftsmanship. Maybe—" "Sofia," Eli's voice carried the firm kindness he used when her enthusiasm needed gentle redirection. "We don't build our hopes on maybes. We build them on what we can control, our work, our integrity, our care for each other." But even as he spoke the words, Eli could feel their inadequacy against the mounting pressures they faced. That morning's mail had brought another notice from their landlord. This one printed on paper that seemed deliberately ominous in its bright yellow color. 2 months behind on rent, with eviction proceedings to begin if the balance wasn't settled within 30 days. 2 months. 8 weeks of careful budgeting, of choosing between groceries and utilities, of watching Sofia practice, her dance routines in shoes that needed replacement but couldn't be replaced. The arithmetic of their situation allowed for no optimism, no matter how skilled his craftsmanship or how dedicated his service to the community. After dinner, Sofia retreated to her room to work on homework, while Eli sat at the small desk in the corner of the shop, surrounded by the bills that seemed to multiply when he wasn't looking. Electric company, water department, supplier invoices for leather and rubber that he needed to maintain his business but couldn't afford to pay promptly. Each envelope contained numbers that mocked his belief in the value of honest work. He pulled out the business card again, running his thumb across the embossed lettering. Juliette LaRue had seemed genuinely interested in his philosophy about restoration, about the value of fixing things properly rather than discarding them. But interest and business opportunity existed in different universes, and Eli had spent too many years in the practical world to confuse one for the other. Still, there was something in her voice when she had talked about always having to prove herself, something in the way she had looked around his shop as if seeing a kind of authenticity she rarely encountered. Maybe Sofia was right. Maybe this was an opportunity worth exploring, even if it meant setting aside the pride that had sustained 3 generations of Navarros. The bell above his door chimed softly in the evening breeze, and for a moment Eli's heart jumped with the irrational hope that Jet had returned. But it was only the wind stirring the mechanism with the same randomness that seemed to govern so much of life. He folded the business card carefully and placed it in the desk drawer, next to the calculator he used for the monthly accounting that always revealed more questions than answers. Tomorrow he would make a decision. Tonight, he would finish Mrs. Patterson's pumps and try to find comfort in work that he understood completely. Upstairs, he could hear Sofia moving through her evening routine, the soft thud of dance practice even in the small space of her bedroom, the whisper of pages turning as she studied for tomorrow's classes, the barely audible music from her phone that provided accompaniment to dreams that seemed simultaneously precious and impossible. When she was younger, Sofia used to fall asleep to the sounds of his work in the shop below, the rhythmic tapping, of hammer on leather, the whistle of the buffing wheel, the gentle scrape of tools against resistant material. Those sounds had been her lullabies, the soundtrack to a childhood spent in the presence of craft and care. Now she fell asleep to silence more often than not, her father having learned to work more quietly so as not to disturb her studies. But tonight, Eli found himself working with less concern for noise. The steady rhythm of restoration felt like a prayer, a meditation on the possibility that broken things could indeed be made whole again with the right attention and enough patience. Each stitch in Mrs. Patterson's pumps represented hope that tomorrow might offer solutions he couldn't see today, opportunities that existed just beyond the edge of his current understanding. The yellow eviction notice lay folded beside his tools, a harsh reminder of deadlines that wouldn't wait for hope to transform into action. 30 days to find an answer, to discover whether the bridge between his world and Juliette LaRue's could support the weight of his family's needs. 30 days to decide whether pride was a luxury he could still afford, or a barrier he needed to overcome for Sofia's sake. Outside, Maple Street settled into its evening quiet, the sounds of transformation and progress temporarily muted by darkness. Inside Navarro's shoe repair, Eli worked by lamplight, surrounded by the tools and traditions that had sustained his family for generations, hoping they might prove sufficient for whatever challenges tomorrow would bring. 43 floors above the city streets, Juliette LaRue stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of her corner office, watching the morning traffic move through intersections like blood cells through arteries. From this height, individual people disappeared into patterns of movement, their personal struggles and small victories invisible against the larger rhythm of urban life. She wondered if somewhere down there, Eli Navarro was opening his shop, arranging his tools with the same careful precision she had witnessed 3 days ago. The thought surprised her with its persistence. She had built a career on compartmentalization, on the ability to focus completely on the task at hand without distraction. Yet the memory of his small shop, with its honest smells and worn surfaces, intruded at unexpected moments throughout her days. Even now, preparing for a quarterly review meeting that would determine the future direction of her company, part of her attention remained fixed on the image of skilled hands working with patience and care. Ms. LaRue, her assistant David, appeared in the doorway with the measured deference that characterized all interactions in the executive suite. The board members are assembling in conference room A. Jet nodded, smoothing her jacket and checking her reflection in the darkened computer screen. Today's armor consisted of a tailored Armani suit in charcoal gray, Hermes heels that cost more than most people made in a month, and the carefully composed expression that suggested complete confidence in every decision she was about to make. The costume of leadership, as she had learned to think of it. The boardroom occupied the northeast corner of the 43rd floor, its polished table surrounded by leather chairs that could have furnished a small apartment. 12 men in expensive suits sat reviewing quarterly reports, their conversations conducted in the coded language of profit margins and market penetration. At 28, Jet was not only the youngest person in the room by 2 decades, but also the only woman. Facts that were never explicitly mentioned, but never quite forgotten either. "Gentlemen," she said, taking her seat at the head of the table, with practiced authority. "Let's begin with the third quarter numbers." For the next hour, she guided the discussion through familiar territory. Revenue growth that exceeded projections, expansion into new markets, cost-cutting measures that had improved efficiency. The LaRue Fashion Group controlled a portfolio of brands that ranged from accessible department store lines to luxury boutiques, all united by a commitment to trends that moved faster than consumer wallets could follow. But as the presentation progressed, Jet found herself growing increasingly uncomfortable with the language they used to describe their customers. Target demographics, purchase drivers, disposal cycles. People had become data points, their desires reduced to algorithms that predicted when they would discard last season's shoes in favor of this season's imperative to consume. The fast fashion segment continues to show strong growth, reported Martin Chambers, the longest-serving board member and the most vocal skeptic of Jet's leadership. Consumers are responding well to our accelerated release schedule. Average item lifespan is down to 8 weeks. 8 weeks. Jet thought of Eli's shop, where shoes were expected to last for years, where repair was viewed as an act of respect for both craftsmanship and customer. The contrast felt jarring in ways she couldn't quite articulate. "What about sustainability concerns?" she asked, a question that seemed to surprise the room. "Consumer awareness of environmental impact is increasing. Are we prepared for a shift in purchasing priorities?" Chambers exchanged glances with several other board members. "Ms. LaRue, our research indicates that while consumers express environmental concerns in surveys, their actual purchasing behavior remains focused on price and trends. Sustainability is a luxury they claim to want but rarely pay for. But what if we could change that equation?" Jet pressed, aware that she was venturing into territory they hadn't discussed. "What if we could offer products that lasted longer, cost more initially, but provided better value over time?" The silence that followed felt loaded with skepticism. Richard Blackstone, the company's chief financial officer, consulted his tablet before responding. "The numbers don't support that model, Juliette. Our entire supply chain is optimized for volume and speed. Shifting toward durability would require fundamental changes to manufacturing, sourcing, even retail partnerships. The initial investment would be enormous, with no guarantee of consumer acceptance." Jet nodded, recognizing the practical challenges, even as she felt drawn to explore possibilities that lay beyond the current paradigm. "I understand the complexities, but I'd like to commission a feasibility study. Limited scope, small investment, just to explore what sustainable luxury might look like in today's market." "With respect," Chambers interjected, "your father built this company on the principle of giving customers what they want, when they want it, at prices they can afford. That formula has generated consistent growth for 30 years. Why risk changing? What works?" The mention of her father struck the familiar note of doubt that accompanied every major decision. James LaRue had been a visionary who understood mass-market psychology with intuitive precision. His death 2 years ago had left Jet with a company that bore his fingerprints on every aspect of operation, along with board members who remembered when she was a child visiting his office on weekends. "Because what works today might not work. And tomorrow," she replied, surprised by the conviction in her own voice. "Consumer values are shifting. Environmental consciousness is becoming mainstream. If we don't evolve, we risk being left behind by competitors who understand where the market is heading." But even as she spoke, Jet could feel the resistance in the room. These men had built careers on predictable models, quantifiable risks, strategies that could be justified through historical precedent. The idea of fundamental change, especially change initiated by someone they still thought of as the boss's daughter, triggered instinctive skepticism. After the meeting ended, Jet returned to her office and sat at her desk, pulling out a leather-bound journal she had kept since college. The pages contained thoughts too personal for corporate settings, reflections on the gap between public success and private satisfaction. Today's entry began with a question that had been building since Tuesday afternoon. What if authentic value could compete with artificial urgency? She wrote about Eli's shop, about the way he had handled her broken heel with the same attention a surgeon might give delicate tissue, about his philosophy that some things were worth more when properly restored, about the possibility that consumers might be ready for products that honored craftsmanship over convenience. The journal also contained her growing sense of isolation, the weight of leading a company whose values increasingly felt disconnected from her own. Success measured in quarterly reports seemed hollow when it came at the expense of environmental responsibility and worker dignity. She had everything she had thought she wanted: wealth, power, influence, but found herself envying a cobbler whose greatest satisfaction came from restoring worn shoes to useful life. Her phone buzzed with a text from David. Reminder, charity, gala tonight. Car arrives at 7. Another evening of networking, another opportunity to be photographed, looking successful while making conversation with people who saw her primarily as a business opportunity. The prospect felt exhausting rather than exciting. One more performance in the ongoing theater of executive leadership. But as she prepared to leave the office, Jet found herself thinking about the business card she had left in Eli's shop, wondering if he had kept it or discarded it, along with the paper towels he had used to clean his tools. The thought of that simple rectangle of cardstock sitting in his drawer felt more important than any of the contracts or agreements that filled her own files. Perhaps it was time to find out whether the bridge between their worlds could support the weight of genuine partnership, or if it would collapse under the pressure of incompatible expectations. The Blacktown car pulled up to Navarro's shoe repair on a crisp Friday morning, its polished surface reflecting the autumn sunlight like a dark mirror. Several passers-by paused to stare, unaccustomed to seeing such obvious wealth parked on their modest street. Mrs. Chen emerged from her market to get a better view, while Mr. Rodriguez from the barber shop next door stepped outside with scissors still in hand. Eli watched through his shop window as Juliette LaRue emerged from the vehicle, looking somehow both perfectly composed and slightly uncertain. She wore a navy blue dress that struck the careful balance between professional authority and approachable elegance, her hair pulled back in a style that suggested she had important places to be. But there was something different about her bearing this time. Less of the urgent energy that had characterized their first meeting, more of the thoughtful consideration of someone making a deliberate choice. The bell chimed as she entered, and Eli looked up from the Oxford he had been resoling. "Ms. LaRue, I was wondering if you might come back for that permanent repair." "Actually," Jet said, glancing around the shop with the same fascination she had shown before, "I was hoping we could talk about something other than shoes." Eli set down his tools, noting the carefully controlled nervousness in her voice. "Would you like some coffee? I was just about to make a fresh pot." The offer seemed to surprise her, as if the idea of sitting down for coffee in a shoe repair shop existed outside her normal range of experiences. "That would be nice, thank you," while Eli prepared the coffee on the small hot plate behind his counter. Jet examined the shop with closer attention than her first visit had allowed. She noticed the photographs on the wall, black and white images of his father and grandfather working at the same bench, creating a visual timeline of generational craftsmanship. She studied the careful organization of tools, each implement in its designated place, maintained with the kind of respect that spoke to deep professional pride. "Your family's been doing this for a long time," she observed. "Since 1952, Eli replied, handing her a mug of coffee in a cup that had clearly seen years of faithful service. "My grandfather started the business when he came here from El Salvador. Said he wanted to build something that would last longer than he would." Jet accepted the coffee gratefully, inhaling the rich aroma that seemed to anchor her in the present moment. In her world, coffee came from machines that cost more than some people's cars, served in cups that were discarded after single use. This felt different, more intentional, more personal. "He succeeded," she said, gesturing toward the photographs. 3 generations of lasting, and hopefully more to come," Eli replied, though something in his tone suggested uncertainty about that hope. They stood for a moment in comfortable silence, drinking coffee and listening to the muted sounds of the street outside. Jet found herself studying Eli's hands, noting the small scars that spoke to decades of careful work with sharp tools, the calluses that came from handling rough materials, the steady confidence of movements repeated thousands. Of times. I've been thinking about what you said, she finally ventured, about things being worth more when they're put back together right. Eli nodded, waiting for her to continue. My company makes things that are designed to fall apart, she said, the admission coming easier than she had expected. We call it planned obsolescence, but really it's just a fancy way of saying we want people to throw things away so they'll buy new things. It's profitable, but it's also wasteful in ways that keep me awake at night. What would you rather be making? Eli asked, the question direct but gentle. Jet paused, realizing that no one had asked her that question in years. Things that last, things that get better with age, that develop character through use, things that people want to repair instead of replace. Like shoes, Eli said with a slight smile. Like shoes, she agreed. But I don't know how to get from where we are to where I want us to be. The board sees sustainability as a cost center. Consumers claim to want environmental responsibility, but usually choose the cheaper option, and our entire business model is built on volume and speed. Eli refilled their coffee cups, his movements unhurried despite the intensity of the conversation. When I'm working on a shoe that seems too damaged to save, I start with the foundation. Fix what's broken at the base level, then work outward from there. And if the foundation is the problem, then you rebuild it, carefully with better materials, taking time to do it right. Jet felt something shift in her understanding, a recognition that the metaphor extended far beyond shoe repair. I think I might need help rebuilding my foundation. What kind of help? She took a deep breath, aware that she was about to propose something that would sound crazy to anyone in her corporate world. I want to offer you a consulting position. Part-time, flexible schedule, but with real influence over product development. I need someone who understands craftsmanship, who can help us figure out how to make things that honor both quality and accessibility. Eli's hand stilled on his coffee cup. Ms. LaRue, Jet, please. Jet. I appreciate the offer, but I'm not sure what someone like me could contribute to a company like yours. I fix shoes, you run a fashion empire. You understand value, she said firmly. Real value, not artificial scarcity or manufactured desire. You know the difference between price and worth, between convenience and satisfaction. Those insights are exactly what we need. Eli looked around his shop, at the bills stacked on his desk, at the photograph of his father who had taught him that honest work was its own reward. The practical part of his mind calculated what a consulting fee from LaRue Fashion Group might mean for Sofia's dance auditions, for the rent they couldn't afford, for the future that seemed increasingly uncertain. I wouldn't know where to start, he said quietly. We'd figure it out together, Jet replied. I'm not asking you to abandon this. She gestured toward his workbench, his tools, the shop that represented 3 generations of dedication. I'm asking you to help me understand how this kind of integrity might translate to a larger scale. In the back corner of the shop, where Eli kept his personal items, Maria's wedding ring sat in a small velvet box inside the desk drawer. He had placed it there after her funeral, unable to wear it, but unwilling to put it away completely. Sometimes, when facing difficult decisions, he found himself thinking about what she would have advised. Maria had possessed an artist's eye for possibility, a willingness to see potential where others saw only problems. Can I think about it? He asked. Of course. Take all the time you need. As Jet prepared to leave, she paused at the door, looking back at this man who had somehow managed to create sanctuary in the midst of urban chaos. Thank you for the coffee, and for listening. After she left, Eli stood alone in his shop, surrounded by the tools and traditions that had shaped his understanding of work and worth. The offer hung in the air like a bridge between worlds, promising opportunity, but demanding trust in equal measure. Outside, the neighborhood continued its daily rhythm, unaware that the conversation that had just concluded might change everything about their familiar landscape. He returned to his workbench and picked up the Oxford he had been repairing, running. his fingers along the worn leather with practiced assessment. Some repairs were straightforward, requiring only basic materials and time. Others demanded complete reconstruction, rebuilding from the foundation up with faith that the result would justify the effort invested. Perhaps, he thought, the same principles applied to more than just shoes. 2 weeks later, Eli found himself standing in the marble-floored lobby of the LaRue Fashion Group headquarters, feeling like a character who had wandered into the wrong story. The building soared 43 floors above the financial district, its glass and steel facade reflecting a world that operated according to rules he was only beginning to understand. Security guards in crisp uniforms checked identification with polite efficiency, while well-dressed executives moved through the space with the purposeful urgency that seemed to characterize life at this altitude. Sofia had insisted on helping him choose his outfit, his best khaki pants, a navy button-down shirt that Maria had bought him 3 Christmases ago, and leather shoes he had resoled twice but polished to mirror perfection. He carried a worn leather messenger bag that contained notebooks, measuring tools, and the prototype sketches he'd been working on since accepting Jet's offer. The decision hadn't come easily. 3 conversations with Sofia, 2 sleepless nights, and 1 long walk through the neighborhood where he had spent his entire adult life. The turning point had come when he opened the desk drawer to file some receipts and saw Maria's wedding ring resting in its velvet box. Instead of the familiar pang of loss, he felt something that might have been permission, a sense that moving forward didn't require abandoning the past, but could honor it in new ways. Mr. Navarro, a young woman in an elegant grey suit, approached, with the kind of smile that suggested professional warmth without personal commitment. "I'm Sarah Chen, Ms. LaRue's assistant. She's waiting for you in the design studio." The elevator ride to the 38th floor provided a gradual transition between worlds. Through the glass walls, Eli watched the city shrink to manageable proportions, individual buildings becoming components of a larger pattern that revealed itself only from this perspective. He thought of his grandfather, who had arrived in this same city with nothing but craftsman's tools and unshakable faith in the value of honest work. Roberto Navarro could never have imagined his grandson would one day consult for a fashion empire, but he would have understood the core principle, bringing skill and integrity to wherever they were needed most. The design studio occupied the northeast corner of the floor, its open layout filled with natural light and creative energy. Sketching tables, fabric samples, and mannequins created an organized chaos that reminded Eli of his own shop, though executed at a scale that dwarfed anything he had previously experienced. At the center of the activity, Jet stood reviewing prototypes with a team of designers, her voice carrying the authority of someone comfortable with creative collaboration. "Eli," she looked up as he entered, her genuine pleasure at seeing him warming the professional atmosphere. "Perfect timing. We were just discussing construction techniques for the sustainable line." She led him to a workstation where several shoe prototypes were displayed, each representing different approaches to environmental responsibility. Some featured recycled materials, others emphasized durability over fashion trends, and a few experimented with modular designs that allowed for component replacement rather than complete disposal. "These are impressive," Eli said, examining the prototypes with professional interest. "But I'm wondering about the foundation structure. Mind if I take a closer look?" "Please," Jet replied, gesturing toward a chair. "That's exactly why you're here." For the next hour, Eli worked with tools borrowed from the design team, disassembling one of the prototypes to examine its internal construction. The experience felt familiar yet foreign, the same fundamental principles of shoemaking, but applied with materials and techniques that pushed beyond traditional boundaries. "The concept is sound," he explained to the assembled designers, "but the heel attachment won't last more than 6 months with regular use. You need a stronger bonding agent here, and maybe consider a mechanical fastener as backup support." He sketched modifications on the whiteboard, his drawing style crude compared to the elegant fashion illustrations surrounding them, but precise in ways that communicated engineering solutions. The designers asked questions about stress points, wear patterns, and repair techniques, their curiosity genuine rather than polite. "This is fascinating," said Marcus, the lead designer for the sustainable line. "We've been thinking about durability as a materials problem, but you're approaching it as a structural engineering challenge." "Everything's connected," Eli replied, warming to the subject. "The best shoe starts with understanding how people actually walk, then building outward from that reality. Fashion is important, but function has to come first, or nothing else matters." As the afternoon progressed, Eli found himself drawn into conversations that ranged far beyond his initial comfort zone. Supply chain ethics, manufacturing partnerships, consumer education, topics that had never been part of his daily vocabulary, but felt increasingly relevant to the work they were attempting. Jet watched the interactions with growing excitement. Her instinct about Eli had been correct. His perspective was exactly what the team needed to bridge the gap between idealistic sustainability and practical implementation. But more than that, his presence seemed to elevate the entire creative process, introducing questions that pushed everyone toward more thoughtful solutions. "What about after-sales support?" Eli asked during a discussion of marketing strategies. "If you're asking people to invest more money up front for shoes that last longer, shouldn't you also offer repair services to ensure they actually do last longer?" The question created a moment of silence. Marcus exchanged glances with several other team members before responding. "We've never considered post-purchase service as part of the product offering." "Maybe you should," Eli suggested gently. "In my shop, relationships don't end at the point of sale. They begin there. People trust you with their shoes because they know you'll take care of them long term. Same principle might apply here." By late afternoon, they had developed the rough framework for what Jet privately thought of as the Navarro prototype, a women's flat that combined sustainable materials with construction techniques designed for decades of use. Supported by a network of certified repair partners who could maintain the shoes throughout their extended lifespan. "This could actually work," Jet said as the team gathered around the final sketches. "It's not just a product, it's a relationship. Model that extends brand loyalty through service rather than replacement." Eli nodded, feeling the satisfaction that came from solving complex problems through applied knowledge. "My grandfather used to say that the best customers are the ones who come back, not the ones who buy once and disappear." As the workday concluded, Jet walked Eli to the elevator, both of them carrying the energy that came from productive collaboration. "How does this feel?" she asked. "Being here, working on this kind of scale?" "Different," Eli admitted, "but not as different as I expected. The fundamentals are the same. Understanding what people need, then figuring out how to provide it with integrity. The tools and materials change, but the core purpose remains constant. And at home, how's Sofia adjusting to the new schedule?" Eli's face brightened at the mention of his daughter. "She starts at the Manhattan Dance Academy next month. Full scholarship, plus a small stipend for living expenses. She's been practicing 8 hours a day, preparing for the intensity." "That's wonderful," Jet said, meaning it completely. "She must be thrilled." "She is. We both are." The elevator arrived, and as Eli stepped inside, he turned back to face Jet. "Thank you for this opportunity, for believing that my kind of knowledge might have value in your world." "Thank you for being willing to share it," she replied. "I think we might be building something important here." As the elevator descended toward street level, carrying Eli back toward his familiar neighborhood and the shop that remained the center of his identity, he reflected on the day's work. The prototype they had developed represented more than just an environmental initiative or marketing strategy. It embodied a philosophy about value that could potentially reshape how people thought about consumption and care. The sustainable shoe, with its emphasis on longevity and service, had become an artifact of possibility, a tangible representation of what could happen when traditional craftsmanship met contemporary innovation. Whether it would succeed in the marketplace remained to be seen, but the process of creating it had already changed everyone involved, including the cobbler who had learned that his small shop's principles could indeed scale to influence much larger conversations about quality and responsibility. The discovery happened on a Saturday morning, 3 months into Eli's collaboration with LaRue Fashion Group. Sofia had been helping him organize the shop's storage areas when she called from the basement with excitement in her voice that made him set down his tools and hurry downstairs. "Papa, you need to see this," she said, standing beside an old wooden crate that had been hidden behind decades of accumulated supplies. "I was moving some of the old leather scraps when I found this. Back here." The crate bore the markings of age, water stains, nail holes where shipping labels had once been attached, and the kind of patina that came from long storage in less than ideal conditions. But what caught Eli's attention immediately was the faded lettering burned into the wood. Eli Navarro, Master Craftsman, 1943. Abuelo's things. Sofia asked, using the Spanish word for grandfather that she had learned from Eli's stories about Roberto. "Must be," Eli replied, though he had no memory of this particular crate. His father had died when Eli was only 22, and in the grief that followed, many family artifacts had been stored rather than sorted. "Help me move it upstairs where we can see better." The crate proved heavier than its size suggested, requiring both of them to maneuver it carefully up the narrow basement. Stairs. Once positioned near the shop's main window, Eli used a pry bar to carefully remove the lid, revealing contents that had been wrapped in oiled cloth and packed with the methodical care of someone who expected them to survive indefinitely. Thus, first items he lifted out were tools, hand-forged awls, lasting pliers with wooden handles worn smooth by decades of use, and knives for cutting leather that had been maintained with religious devotion. Each piece bore the marks of master craftsmanship, created in an era when tools were expected to last multiple lifetimes. "These are beautiful," Sofia whispered, running her fingers along the smooth metal of an edge burnisher. "They look like they were made by an artist." "They were," Eli replied, his voice thick with unexpected emotion. "Your great-grandfather made most of these himself before he had the money to buy factory-made tools. But beneath the tools, wrapped in what had once been fine leather, but had deteriorated to the texture of parchment, lay documents that would change everything Eli thought he knew about his family's history. The first was a contract, dated 1924, written in English and Spanish, establishing Roberto Navarro as chief design consultant for a company called LaRue Brothers Manufacturing. Eli's hands trembled as he read the terms of the agreement. Roberto had been commissioned to develop innovative shoe construction techniques and aesthetic design elements for what the contract described as a new approach to affordable fashion. Footwear. The compensation was generous for the era, but more importantly, the contract granted Roberto partial ownership of any designs he created, along with attribution credit on all marketing materials. "Papa," Sofia said quietly, reading over his shoulder, "isn't LaRue the name of Jet's family?" Eli finished, his mind racing through implications he was only beginning to understand. Her great-grandfather's company. They continued unpacking the crate with growing amazement and mounting unease. Sketch after sketch revealed Roberto's hand in designs that Eli recognized from LaRue Fashion Group's historical marketing materials, the distinctive heel shape that had become the company's signature, the innovative sole construction that had allowed for both durability and elegance, even the curved arch support that remained a hallmark of LaRue shoes decades later. But the most damning document lay at the bottom of the crate, a letter from Henri LaRue, dated 1926, terminating Roberto's contract and claiming full ownership of all designs created during their partnership. The language was coldly legal, invoking clauses about work for hire and company proprietary interests that effectively stripped Roberto of any continuing benefit from his innovations. Roberto's response? A carbon copy typed on letterhead from a legal firm that no longer existed, contested the termination and demanded compensation for designs that were already generating substantial profits. The letter detailed specific contributions Roberto had made to what would become the foundation of the LaRue fashion empire, contributions that had apparently been systematically erased from the company's official history. The final document was a newspaper clipping from 1927 announcing the revolutionary new shoe designs that had established LaRue brothers as the foremost innovator in American footwear. Eli LaRue was quoted extensively about his personal vision and commitment to combining European craftsmanship with American efficiency. Roberto Navarro's name appeared nowhere in the article. Eli sat heavily on his work stool, the papers scattered across his bench like evidence of a crime committed decades before his birth. Everything he had believed about his family's history, the immigrant craftsman who had built a modest business through honest work, the principled man who had never achieved the recognition his skills deserved, required complete revision. They stole his designs, Sofia said, her voice carrying a mix of anger and amazement. Abuelo created the foundation of their entire company, and they took credit for everything. It looks that way, Eli replied, though part of him still hoped for some alternative explanation that would preserve his faith in the basic fairness of the world. Sofia was already pulling out her phone, her generation's instinct to research and verify everything they encountered. "I'm looking up the LaRue company history online," she said, scrolling through search results with practiced efficiency. "Listen to this. Founded in 1924 by Henri and Jacques LaRue, the company built its reputation on innovative design techniques and revolutionized affordable fashion footwear." She continued reading, but Eli had stopped listening. The implications of their discovery extended far beyond historical injustice. His entire relationship with Jet, his position as a consultant helping to develop sustainable designs, the prototype they had created together, all of it was built on a foundation of exploitation that had robbed his family of credit and compensation for 3 generations. The irony was overwhelming. He had been helping the LaRue fashion group develop products that honored craftsmanship and integrity, while the company's very existence was based on the theft of his grandfather's creative work. The sustainable shoe prototype, which he had seen as an artifact of possibility and ethical progress, now felt like a continuation of the same dynamic that had enriched the LaRue family while keeping the Navarros in poverty. "What are you going to do?" Sofia asked, studying his face with concern. Eli looked around his shop, the worn workbench where 3 generations of Navarros had practiced their craft, the tools that represented knowledge passed down through decades of patient teaching, the photographs on the wall that documented a family's commitment to honest work. Everything in this space spoke to values that seemed fundamentally incompatible with the evidence spread before him. "I don't know," he admitted. "I need to think about this. I need to—" He couldn't finish the sentence because he wasn't sure what he needed to do. Confront Jet with the documents? Demand recognition and compensation for his grandfather's work? Walk away from the consulting position that had already changed their lives in ways they couldn't easily reverse? The prototype sustainable shoe sat on his workbench, where he had been making final adjustments. Its clean lines and innovative construction techniques a testament to what could be accomplished when traditional craftsmanship met contemporary resources. But now it felt like evidence of his own naivety, proof that he had allowed himself to be seduced by the same family that had once betrayed his grandfather's trust. Sofia gathered the documents carefully, her movements precise despite the emotional weight of their contents. "Whatever you decide to do, Papa, I'll support you." But Abuelo deserves to have his story told. His work deserves to be recognized. Eli nodded, though recognition felt inadequate compared to the scale of what had been taken. Roberto Navarro's innovations had helped build a fashion empire worth hundreds of millions of dollars, while his descendants struggled to pay rent on a small shoe repair shop. The mathematics of injustice were staggering in their simplicity. As he locked the documents in his desk drawer beside Maria's wedding ring, Eli reflected on the complexity of human relationships and the weight of inherited sins. Jet had approached him with what seemed like genuine respect for his knowledge and authentic desire to create something meaningful. But she was also the beneficiary of wealth built on the theft of his family's creative work. The grandfathers, cobbler tools, now revealed as artifacts of exploitation rather than simple family history, sat on his workbench like questions demanding answers. Tomorrow, he would have to decide whether the bridge between his world and Jet's could survive the weight of this revelation, or whether some betrayals were too fundamental to overcome, regardless of the good intentions of those who inherited their consequences. Outside, the neighborhood continued its weekend rhythm, unaware that the modest shoe repair shop on Maple Street had become the center of a story that connected 4 generations of 2 families in ways that neither had fully understood until now. The weeks following the discovery passed in a haze of strained conversations and careful distances. Eli continued his consulting work at LaRue Fashion Group, but the easy collaboration that had marked their early partnership gave way to a professional politeness that fooled no one. He showed up punctually, contributed technical expertise when asked, and left promptly at the end of each session without the lingering discussions that had once extended their working relationship into something approaching friendship. Jet noticed the change immediately but couldn't identify its source. Their prototype had been approved for limited production, the sustainable line was generating positive industry attention, and the board had grudgingly acknowledged that Eli's influence was producing measurable results. Yet something fundamental had shifted in his demeanor, as if a door that had been gradually opening was now firmly closed. "Is everything all right?" she asked after a particularly tense design meeting where Eli had answered direct questions with monosyllables and avoided eye contact throughout the presentation. "Everything's fine," he replied, already packing his tools with the efficiency of someone eager to be elsewhere. "The sole reinforcement specs we discussed should work well for the production run." But everything was clearly not fine, and Jet found herself replaying their recent interactions, searching for clues about what might have caused such a dramatic withdrawal. Had she said something insensitive? Had the corporate environment finally worn down his patience? Had the pressure of balancing 2 worlds become too much for someone whose life had been defined by the comfortable predictability of neighborhood rhythms? Meanwhile, Sofia was facing pressures of her own. The Manhattan Dance Academy had proven everything she had hoped and more. Rigorous training, world-class instruction, and an environment where her talent could flourish without the limitations imposed by financial constraints. But the intensity of the program meant she was away from home 14 hours a day, leaving Eli alone with his thoughts and the weight of the documents that seemed to grow heavier each time he looked at them. Her dance recital, scheduled for the first Saturday in December, had become a beacon of normalcy in their increasingly complicated lives. Sofia talked about it constantly, the Giselle variations she would perform, the costume she had been fitted for, the pride she felt at being selected for a solo piece in only her first semester. The recital represented everything Eli had hoped his sacrifice would achieve, his daughter's dreams becoming reality through talent, hard work, and the opportunities that proper training could provide. "You'll invite Jet, won't you?" Sofia asked one evening as they shared a quiet dinner in their small apartment above the shop. "She's been so important to making this possible." Eli paused with his fork halfway to his mouth, the simple question carrying complications Sofia couldn't fully understand. "I'm sure she has other commitments." "Papa, what's going on between you two?" Sofia's direct approach to difficult conversations was another trait inherited from her mother, a tendency to address problems rather than dance around them. "Ever since you found Abuelo's things, you've been different, sadder, but also angry in a way I've never seen before." Eli set down his fork and studied his daughter's face, seeing Maria's intuitive intelligence combined with a strength that would serve her well in the challenging world she was entering. Sofia deserved to understand the full scope of what they had discovered, but she also deserved to pursue her dreams without being burdened by grievances that predated her birth. "It's complicated, Misha," he said finally. "The documents we found, they change things. They make me question whether I can continue working with the LaRue company in good conscience because they stole Abuelo's designs." Her matter-of-fact summary surprised him. "You understand what that means?" "Of course I understand," Sofia replied with the impatience of a teenager addressing an adult who was underestimating her comprehension. "But I also understand that Jet had nothing to do with what happened 90 years ago. She wasn't even born when her great-grandfather cheated our family." "But she's benefited from it," Eli pointed out. "Her entire life, her wealth, her position, all of it was built on work that should have been credited and compensated to our family." Sofia considered this for a moment, then asked, "And what good would it do to punish her for something she didn't do? How does that honor Abuelo's memory, or make anything better for us now?" The question struck at the heart of Eli's internal struggle. Part of him wanted justice, recognition, perhaps even financial compensation for decades of unpaid royalties. But another part recognized that Jet had approached him with genuine respect, had valued his knowledge, and treated him as an equal partner in their collaborative work. She had helped make Sofia's dance training possible, and had shown authentic interest in creating products that honored craftsmanship rather than exploiting it. "I don't know what's right," he admitted. "I keep thinking about what your mother would have advised, but I can't hear her voice clearly anymore." Sofia reached across the table and took his hand, her gesture carrying the kind of mature compassion that reminded him how much she had grown during their months of financial struggle and newfound opportunity. "Mama always said that carrying anger was like trying to hold hot coals. It burns you more than anyone else." The observation was accurate enough to be painful. Eli had been carrying the weight of his grandfather's betrayal for weeks, letting it color every interaction with Jet and poison the satisfaction he had found in their collaborative work. The sustainable shoe prototype, which should have represented hope and innovation, had become a reminder of historical injustice rather than a bridge toward better practices. "Maybe I should tell her," he said, as much to himself as to Sofia. "Maybe she deserves to know the full history before we continue working together." "Maybe," Sofia agreed, "but maybe you should also ask yourself what you want the outcome to be. Are you looking for an apology, compensation, recognition, or are you just trying to decide whether you can trust her?" The recital program arrived in the mail that Thursday, an elegantly printed booklet that listed Sofia among the featured performers. Seeing her name in print, associated with an institution as prestigious as the Manhattan Dance Academy, filled Eli with the kind of pride that temporarily overshadowed all other considerations. Whatever complications marked his professional relationship with Jet, the core purpose had been achieved. His daughter's talent was being recognized and developed in ways that would have been impossible without the consulting income. He studied the program details, noting that each performer was allowed to invite up to 4 guests for the evening performance. The recital would take place in the Academy's main theater, a venue that Sofia had described with reverence during her early weeks of training. For her, the event represented validation of years of practice in makeshift spaces, confirmation that her dreams could indeed translate into professional achievement. Eli made his decision while sitting in his shop that evening, surrounded by the tools and photographs that connected him to 3 generations of craftsmanship. He would invite Jet to Sofia's recital, but before the performance, he would share the documents they had discovered and let her respond to the full truth about their family's intertwined history. The recital would serve as a natural conclusion to whatever conversation emerged, either a celebration of partnership that could survive historical complications or a graceful ending to a collaboration that had run its course. The invitation, when he called to extend it, seemed to surprise and please her. "I'd be honored to attend," she said, her voice carrying genuine warmth that reminded him of why he had been drawn to work with her in the first place. "Sofia's incredibly talented. I've been hoping for a chance to see her perform. There's something else we need to discuss," Eli said carefully. "Something about our family's history that I discovered recently. Would you be willing to meet at the shop beforehand? Maybe an hour before we need to leave for the theater?" "Of course," Jet replied, though he could hear the concern in her voice. "Is everything all right? We'll talk about it then," he said, not ready to explain the scope of what awaited them. After ending the call, Eli sat quietly in his shop, listening to the familiar sounds of his neighborhood settling into evening rhythms. Tomorrow would bring revelations that might end their partnership or transform it into something deeper and more honest. The recital program sat on his workbench beside the prototype sustainable shoe, two artifacts representing different kinds of achievement and possibility. Sofia's voice drifted down from upstairs, practicing her variations with the disciplined repetition that had carried her from community center classes to professional training. The sound reminded him that some dreams were worth the risks required to pursue them, and that sometimes the most important conversations were the ones that demanded complete honesty about the foundations upon which relationships were built. Whatever tomorrow brought, he would face it with the same commitment to integrity that had guided 3 generations of Navarros, trusting that truth, however painful, provided the only solid foundation for anything worth building together. Jet arrived at Navarro's shoe repair 30 minutes early, her punctuality betraying the nervousness she had been trying to hide since Eli's cryptic phone call. She wore a midnight blue dress appropriate for an evening at the theater, but her hands trembled slightly as she pushed open the familiar door, uncertain what kind of conversation awaited her in the space where their partnership had begun. Eli stood behind his workbench, dressed in his best suit, the charcoal grey one he had worn to Maria's funeral and kept pressed for the rare occasions that demanded formal attire. On the workbench before him lay an array of documents, photographs, and tools, arranged with the same methodical precision he brought to every aspect of his craft. "Thank you for coming early," he said, his voice carrying a formality that had been absent from their recent interactions. "What I need to show you, it's going to change everything about our working relationship, maybe end it entirely." Jet approached the workbench cautiously, noting the vintage tools that appeared far older than anything she had seen in the shop before. The documents, yellowed with age and bearing letterheads from companies that no longer existed, suggested historical significance that made her pulse quicken with undefined apprehension. "These belong to my grandfather," Eli began, lifting one of the hand-forged awls with reverence that bordered on ceremony. "Roberto Navarro. I found them a few weeks ago, along with papers that tell a story I never knew existed." He handed her the 1924 contract first, watching her face as she read the terms that had initially promised partnership between Roberto Navarro and LaRue Brothers Manufacturing. Jet's expression shifted from curiosity to confusion to dawning horror as she absorbed the implications of what she was reading. "Your grandfather worked for my great-grandfather's company," she said, the words emerging as statement rather than in question. "More than worked for," Eli replied, producing the sketches that revealed Roberto's hand in designs that had become LaRue Fashion Group's foundation. "He created the innovations that built your family's empire, the heel construction techniques, the arch support systems, even the aesthetic elements that became your company's signature style." Jet studied the sketches with growing amazement. recognizing design elements that still appeared in LaRue products nearly a century later. The curved arch support that remained a hallmark of their comfort line, the distinctive heel shape that graced their logo, the sole construction method that had allowed them to achieve both durability and elegance. All of it bore Roberto Navarro's distinctive style and technical innovation. But this contract gives him ownership rights, she said, reading the terms more carefully. Partial ownership of designs, attribution credit, ongoing royalties. Read the next document, Eli said quietly. The 1926 termination letter struck Jet like a physical blow. Eli LaRue's cold dismissal of Roberto's claims, the legal maneuvering that had stripped away recognition and compensation, the systematic erasure of his contributions from company history. It painted a picture of calculated exploitation that made her feel physically ill. "Oh God," she whispered, sinking into the chair beside his workbench. "Oh God, Eli, I had no idea." She continued reading through Roberto's legal response, the newspaper clipping that celebrated Eli LaRue's revolutionary innovations, without mentioning their true source, and the financial records that showed how the stolen designs had generated immediate and substantial profits for the LaRue company. "This is why you've been distant," she said, understanding flooding her voice. "This is why everything changed between us." Eli nodded, noting the genuine shock and distress in her expression. "My grandfather died believing he had failed, that his ideas weren't good enough to support his family properly. He never knew that his innovations were generating millions of dollars for your great-grandfather, while we struggled to keep the shop open." Jet set down the papers with hands that shook visibly, her composure finally cracking under the weight of inherited guilt. "Eli, I don't know what to say. I don't know how to process this. My entire life, everything I've achieved, the education I received, the opportunities that were available to me, all built on work that should have been credited and compensated to my family," Eli finished gently. 3 generations of Navarros living in poverty while 3 generations of LaRues lived in luxury, funded by Roberto's creativity. The restored vintage shoe collection sat on a nearby shelf, pieces Eli had been working on for months as examples of traditional craftsmanship techniques. Each shoe represented hours of patient restoration, bringing discarded footwear back to functional beauty. Through skill and dedication, now they seemed like artifacts of a different kind of restoration, the patient work of uncovering truth that had been buried beneath decades of carefully constructed company mythology. "What do you want from me?" Jet asked, her voice barely above. A whisper. What would make this right? Eli had been expecting the question, but found himself without a clear answer. "I don't know if anything can make it right," he admitted. "The damage was done too long ago, to people who are no longer here, to receive justice. But I couldn't continue working with you without you knowing the truth about how our families are connected." "The board," Jet said suddenly, her mind racing through implications. "If this becomes public, if the media discovers that our company's foundation was built on stolen designs—" "I'm not interested in destroying your company," Eli said firmly, "but I needed you to know. I needed you to understand that every time I work on your sustainable line, I'm contributing to the same company that robbed my grandfather of recognition and compensation." Outside, the winter evening was settling over Maple Street, and Sofia would be preparing for her performance at the Academy. The recital that should have been a celebration of dreams achieved had become the backdrop for a reckoning with historical injustice that neither of them had sought, but both now faced. The vintage shoes seemed to watch them from their shelf, silent, witnesses to the conversation that would determine whether the bridge between their worlds could survive the weight of truth, or whether some betrayals were too fundamental to overcome regardless of the good intentions of those who inherited. Their consequences. The silence that followed Jet's questions stretched between them, like a bridge neither was certain could bear the weight of crossing. Eli studied her face, noting the genuine distress that had replaced her usual composed confidence. the way her hands had stilled on the damning documents as if touching them might somehow change their contents. "I've been thinking about this for weeks," he said finally, "about what justice would look like, what my grandfather would have wanted, what kind of legacy I want to leave for Sofia. And I keep coming back to something he used to tell my father." Jet looked up, her eyes red-rimmed but attentive. "He said that the best craftsman isn't the one who never makes mistakes, but the one who knows how to repair them properly." Eli picked up one of Roberto's hand-forged tools, turning it in the lamplight so the metal gleamed with the patina of decades of careful use. "Maybe the question isn't how to punish your family for what happened, but how to repair the damage, in a way that honors everyone involved." "What would that look like?" Jet asked, her voice carrying a tentative hope that she seemed afraid to fully embrace. Eli reached into his desk drawer and withdrew a document he had been working on during the sleepless nights since their discovery. The papers were covered. With his careful handwriting, legal language, he had researched online and refined through multiple drafts. "A partnership agreement," he said, handing her the document. "Not as an employee or consultant, but as an equal partner in the sustainable line, with Roberto Navarro credited as the foundational designer whose innovations made it all possible, with a percentage of profits designated for a scholarship fund that would help working-class kids pursue training in traditional crafts." Jet read through the proposal with growing amazement, noting details that revealed how thoroughly Eli had considered every aspect of their potential collaboration. The agreement didn't seek to punish or exploit, but to create something genuinely new, a business model that honored the past while building toward a more equitable future. "This is more generous than anything I could have imagined," she said. "But Eli, you have to understand, I can't make this decision alone. The board would have to approve any partnership agreement, and when they learn about the historical connection, then we present it to them together." Eli replied. "We tell the complete story. Your great-grandfather's theft, my grandfather's contributions, and our opportunity to make things right going forward. We show them that acknowledging the truth doesn't have to destroy the company. It can transform it into something better." The proposal represented more than just a business arrangement. It was a blueprint for the kind of restoration that went deeper than repairing broken heels or worn soles. It offered a way to mend relationships, honor memory, and create value that extended beyond quarterly profits. "There's something else," Jet said, her voice gaining strength as she absorbed the implications of his offer. "If we're going to do this, we should do it completely. I want to commission a full historical documentation of Roberto's contributions. I want his story told properly, his innovations credited in our company literature, his name placed where it should have been all along." Eli felt something tight in his chest begin to loosen, a knot of anger and resentment that had been building since they found the documents. This wasn't the conversation he had expected when he decided to reveal the truth. He had prepared for denial, legal maneuvering, perhaps the complete end of their professional relationship. He hadn't prepared for someone who would embrace responsibility and work toward genuine repair. Sofia was right, he said, more to himself than to Jet. About what? She said that carrying anger was like holding hot coals. It burns you more than anyone else. She also said you shouldn't be punished for something you didn't do. Jet's smile, when it came, transformed her entire face. "She sounds like a very wise young woman. I can't wait to see her perform tonight." They worked together for the next 20 minutes, refining the partnership proposal and discussing how to present their findings to the board. The conversation had a different quality than their previous collaborations. More honest, more urgent, but also more hopeful. They were no longer just designing shoes, they were designing a way forward that could honor the past without being trapped by it. When it came time to leave for the recital, Eli carefully placed Roberto's tools back in their protective case, but left the partnership agreement on his workbench. The new contract represented something unprecedented in either of their families' histories, a document that sought to create rather than exploit, to acknowledge rather than erase, to build bridges rather than walls. "Whatever happens with the board," Jet said as they prepared to leave, "I want you to know that working with you has changed how I think about everything. About business, about responsibility, about what it means to create something worthwhile." "Same here," Eli replied, locking the shop door behind them. "I never imagined that a broken heel could lead to all this." As they walked toward the theater, where Sofia would soon perform the Giselle variation she had practiced for months, Eli reflected on the strange alchemy that could transform betrayal into partnership, historical injustice into contemporary opportunity. The new partnership contract, waiting on his workbench like a promise written in careful legal language, represented the kind of restoration that his grandfather could never have imagined, not just of shoes or tools or broken business relationships, but of faith in the possibility that broken things could indeed be made stronger when repaired, with skill, honesty, and mutual respect. 6 months later, spring sunshine streamed through the windows of Navarro's shoe repair, illuminating a space that had been transformed while maintaining its essential character. The workbench remained scarred from decades of use. The pegboard still held Roberto's carefully maintained tools, and the photographs on the wall continued to document 3 generations of craftsmanship. But new elements had been added: a display case featuring the original sustainable shoe prototype alongside historical documentation of Roberto Navarro's contributions to American footwear design, and a small plaque identifying the shop as the birthplace of the Navarro-LaRue Partnership for Ethical Fashion. Eli stood at his workbench, putting the finishing touches on a pair of wedding shoes that represented the culmination of everything he had learned about restoration, patience, and the possibility of creating beauty from broken beginnings. The shoes were for his own wedding, crafted from leather he had selected personally and constructed using techniques that combined Roberto's traditional methods with innovations developed through his collaboration with Jet's design team. The board meeting, where they had presented their partnership proposal, had been one of the most challenging professional experiences of either of their lives. Martin Chambers and the other long-serving members had reacted with predictable horror to the revelation of Henri LaRue's theft, their initial instinct being to suppress the information and maintain the company's carefully constructed public image. But Jet had stood firm, supported by Eli's calm presentation of the facts and their joint proposal for moving forward with integrity rather than defensiveness. The turning point had come when they demonstrated the market response to their limited production run of sustainable shoes. Pre-orders had exceeded projections by 400%. Driven by consumers who were hungry for products that combined quality construction with authentic stories of craftsmanship and social responsibility. The Navarro-LaRue line wasn't just profitable, it was transforming how customers thought about the relationship between price, value, and ethical consumption. "Papa?" Sofia's voice called from upstairs, where she had been getting ready for the ceremony that would take place in the small garden behind the shop. "Are you almost finished down there?" "Just putting on the final polish," Eli replied, buffing the wedding shoes to a lustrous finish that would have made Roberto proud. 5 more minutes. Sofia had completed her first year at the Manhattan Dance Academy with honors, her talent and dedication earning her a spot in the summer intensive program that would prepare her for the competitive world of professional ballet. But she had also developed an interest in business ethics, inspired by watching her father and Jet navigate the complexities of building a partnership that honored the past while creating something genuinely new for the future. She planned to study both dance and business in college, with dreams of someday running an arts foundation that would support young artists from working-class backgrounds. The shop door chimed, and Mrs. Chen entered carrying a small bouquet of flowers from her market. At 74, She had become the unofficial coordinator of neighborhood wedding preparations, organizing contributions from local businesses that had watched Eli's journey from struggling single father to successful entrepreneur with pride and affection. From all of us on Maple Street, she said, presenting the flowers with the same ceremony she might have used for a visiting dignitary. We are so happy for you and Jet. The wedding had evolved from a simple ceremony into a community celebration, with neighbors contributing everything from flowers to food to music. Mr. Rodriguez had offered to provide haircuts for the wedding party. The community center had donated tables and chairs, and even the teenagers who gathered at the corner store had pooled their money to buy a gift for the couple who had become local celebrities. Jet appeared in the doorway, radiant in a cream-colored dress that struck the perfect balance between elegant simplicity and understated luxury. She had spent the morning at the LaRue Foundation offices, finalizing details for the scholarship program that would provide full funding for 50 students annually to pursue training in traditional crafts. The foundation represented her commitment to transforming inherited wealth into genuine opportunity for others, using the resources built on Roberto's stolen designs to support the next generation of craftsmen and artists. "Are you ready?" she asked, her smile carrying all the warmth and affection that had grown between them through months of shared challenges and collaborative problem-solving. Eli slipped on the wedding shoes he had crafted with such care, feeling the perfect fit that came from understanding exactly how feet moved and what kind of support they needed for the long journey ahead. The shoes represented more than just footwear. They were artifacts of hope, tangible proof that broken things could indeed be restored to greater beauty and strength through patience, skill, and love. The ceremony took place in the garden where Sofia had practiced her dance routines during the early months of her training. The same space where Eli had often sat in the evenings, wondering how he would ever be able to support his daughter's dreams. Now the garden bloomed with flowers contributed by neighbors, filled with friends and family who had supported them through the difficult years and celebrated with them as opportunities opened. During the exchange of vows, Eli spoke about the craftsman's understanding of value, how the most beautiful repairs were often invisible, how strength came from acknowledging weakness and addressing it honestly, how love, like skilled restoration, required patience, attention, and faith in the possibility of transformation. Jet responded with words about the difference between inheriting wealth and earning it, about the responsibility that came with privilege, and about discovering that true partnership meant being willing to rebuild foundations when they proved to be flawed, no matter how much work that rebuilding might require. As they exchanged rings, simple bands that Eli had crafted using gold reclaimed from old jewelry, another exercise in restoration and renewal, Sofia performed a brief dance piece she had choreographed specifically for the occasion. Her movements spoke to themes of growth, transformation, and the beauty that emerged when individual strengths were combined in purposeful collaboration. The reception continued late into the evening, with neighbors sharing stories of how the Navarro-LaRue partnership had begun to influence other local businesses, encouraging them to think more carefully about sustainability, worker dignity, and community responsibility. The sustainable shoe line had become a catalyst for broader conversations about ethical business practices, proving that consumers were indeed willing to support companies that prioritized integrity over immediate profit. As the celebration wound down and guests began to drift home, Eli and Jet found themselves alone in the shop, surrounded by the tools and photographs that had witnessed so much change over the past year. The wedding shoes sat on the workbench beside Roberto's vintage tools, old and new, existing in harmony, that would have pleased the master craftsman who had dreamed of building something that would last longer than his own life. So, what's next? Jet asked, leaning against the workbench with the comfortable familiarity of someone who had learned to find beauty in worn surfaces and honest work. Eli smiled, looking around the shop that had been his sanctuary, his classroom, and now the foundation, for a partnership that extended far beyond business into the deeper realm of shared values and mutual respect. "Tomorrow I start working on a new prototype," he said. "Sofia suggested we develop a line of dance shoes that could be repaired and upgraded rather than replaced. Something about honoring the miles traveled rather than just chasing the next performance." "That sounds perfect," Jet replied, understanding that they would spend the rest of their lives finding new ways to apply the lessons they had learned about restoration, integrity, and the possibility of creating something beautiful. From something broken, outside Maple Street settled into its evening quiet, the neighborhood unaware that the modest shoe repair shop had become the center of a story that would influence how future generations thought about craft, commerce, and the responsibility that came with inheriting the consequences of other people's choices. Inside, surrounded by the tools of restoration and the artifacts of hope, two people who had discovered that love, like skilled craftsmanship, could transform the most unlikely materials into something both beautiful and enduring.